Okay, so while the text block's over here drying and it's going to be left there, I guess, for the remainder of the day, we've got a bit of time here to think about what to do with these boards. And what's interesting is, although the leather looks really sort of beaten up and mottled, I actually, in a strange way, quite like it. With the exception of that little tip there, it's actually intact along the edges, which is kind of interesting. Both of them are in reasonable, kind of shape. Got a few missing bumps here and there, but there's actually some nice character to this leather. And I was thinking about, do we go for a full leather replacement as we did with the Commentaria? And the issue we have is, sort of economics plays a part of this as well. So this is the Baradas Commentaria right here. So I restored this with a single very large piece of goat skin. And, a book like this, it's probably worth it. This is a nearly 400-year-old book. It is 400 years old. It's 300. No, 400 years old. And it's, historically significant. So this was well worth, the sort of going for the extra expense and getting a large piece of leather to do a complete restoration. This guy probably just doesn't merit that. And I like this leather anyway. Now, what I've done in the past with similar books, this is a very early attempt. It was very early in my journey of learning here. I sort of just did a simple reback with a spare offcut. Literally came out of a grab bag of leather pieces from Michael's. This was a copy of Church History of Britain by Thomas Fuller. And you can see it's relatively sort of just stuck on. It's very obvious it's a different piece of leather and so on. Could do that. But I started sort of looking more closely at the boards themselves, and we've got opportunities here because if you sort of look inside, so you probably recall the fragments that were here were glued on the inside, so between the paste down and the cardboard. This is where the fragments were stuck, and then they sort of came up and over the spine. We've also got a gap here on this side, so you can actually see where the ribs of the book, the sort of leather thongs that we use to put the loops around for the ribs, they were sort of inserted into the board through a hole. So so they came sort of, they broke here, but they went in through a hole there and then out and then back in, and so they're actually buried between the layers of the board. Obviously, the boards themselves are made out of multiple layers of thinner board and paper, basically. And so, the actual leather thong is sort of buried in there like that. So we've actually therefore already got some holes that we could kind of use. So what I'm thinking is we can use those holes to thread this string in, and obviously we've got the fabric there as well. So what that's going to mean is on the internal surface where the fragments used to be, we're going to have the string, the sort of cord coming out. We could glue that down on that surface, and then we have the fabric being glued down on this inner surface right here. So that'll give us one point of connection to the board. And then probably what I would do is put strips of cardboard like this coming out over the spine and down the other side. And it'll be that cardboard onto which I glue the leather, because I never glue leather directly onto the fabric of the spine itself. So that would work. And then it sort of creates an interesting question around what do we then cover it all with? How do we apply the leather? As I mentioned, doing it the way I did here with this Thomas Fuller is one option. But I think we can actually do something different and actually try something new and learn something in the process. So this is a copy of the Worthies, also Thomas Fuller. This was subject to a restoration, I think relatively recently actually. You can see this piece of leather here in the spine is not the same as this. This is probably, I don't know, 18th century calf probably. And it probably would have, come all the way across, but the leather obviously failed, some time ago. And it's been restored with this new piece of leather. And what's interesting is the restored leather actually goes underneath the original leather. And the results, you actually have to look quite hard to see that actually there's a restoration that's happened. And if you look here at the, bring it into focus, come on, there we go. If you look at the sort of top of the book here, you can actually see how the restored leather has been sort of inserted under, folded over the tops on both sides, like that. And the result's just a really nice restoration. Basically, you can really barely see it. Now, I do not have the skills to do this kind of stamping and so on and so forth. I can't blind stamp to do this sort of thing. I don't have the tools. That's for the future. But what I can probably do is do something to use a smaller piece of leather to, to the same effect. And the real advantage of that is economy. So this is a piece of leather that was an offcut from when I restored the Commentaria. And potentially, this could be, pencil went flying, this could actually be what covers the spine of the book and actually sits just underneath here. So obviously that means basically that I had a free leather. This in effect wouldn't cost me anything. Now I will say that it's not without risk. Obviously this would be the first time I've done this kind of repair. And the other thing is that at its narrowest point, this is actually quite thin. It's not very broad. And there's going to be precious little extra to play with. So what that means is I'm going to have to be very, very conservative in the way in which I trim this edge in order to just get to a nice straight edge. The other thing, of course, is this leather is quite sort of vulnerable. So I'm going to have to just be really careful during the process of doing this work. I'll probably have to sort of sacrifice the top and tail, which basically means I need to use a nice broad piece of the new leather because it'll show here. But I think I'd like to give that a go. I think that could actually work quite nicely. So the very first thing I'm going to have to do is to try and get this leather into the most robust shape possible because it's about to suffer quite a lot of abuse. And so for that, we need leather consolidant. So what I'm going to do is slather both these pieces of leather with consolidant because obviously they're going to be subjected to a lot of gluing underneath and so on and so forth. So that's the plan.